Hello and welcome to Courtesy Media. In this video, I'm going to go over my thoughts on copyright. And this video will be the dry cut version, meaning that in the future I will try to make a better quality version, one that looks more professional, whereas this one is just relatively simply made. So without further ado, let's go on in. What exactly is copyright? According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, it is a noun and it is the exclusive legal right to reproduce, publish, sell, or distribute the matter and form of something. In other words, it is the protection of intellectual property. But don't trademarks and patents also cover intellectual property? You see, all three are forms of intellectual property protection. So what on earth is the difference? So what does the USPTO say? And by the way, that is the United States Patent and Trademark Office. So what qualifies as a patent are any technical inventions such as chemicals, compositions like pharmaceutical drugs, mechanical processes like complex machinery, or machine designs that are new, unique, and usable in some type of industry. So essentially anything that requires any building, more or less. What about a trademark? Trademark is a word, phrase, design, or combination that identifies your goods or services, distinguishes them from the goods or services of others, and indicates the source of your goods or services. That's a lot of goods and services in there, but it's more or less how a business can be identified, like the business or brand name, or their logo, or their slogan. And copyright is the artistic, literary, or intellectually created works, such as novels, music, movies, software code, photographs, and paintings that are original and exist in a tangible medium, such as paper, canvas, film, or digital format. Now, how long do these last? I will get into that with copyright a little bit later, but here's what Supra says about patents and trademarks. For patent, it requires maintenance fees must be paid at 3.5, 7.5, and 11.5 years after issuance of a utility patent, or the patent will expire at 4, 8, or 12 years. A U.S. design patent has a term of 15 years from issuance, but a U.S. plant patent has a term of 20 years from issuance. So what that means is that if something doesn't get renewed between its 3rd and 4th years, or 7th and 8th, and what have you, then it will expire by the end of that upcoming year. And they usually have a maximum of 15, but plant patents are at 20. And then for trademarks, they say that the registrant, at a minimum, submit an affidavit or of use or excusable non-use of the mark in U.S. commerce between the 5th and 6th anniversary of the registration date, between the 9th and 10th anniversary of the registration date, and every 10 years thereafter to keep the registration active. So what that means is that you have to register between your 5th and 6th years for a renewal, between your 9th and 10 years for a renewal, and then it's like that for every other 10 years. So between your 19th and 20th, 29th and 30th, and so on. And by the way, Supra is a source of legal and professional intelligence. So, how does copyright work? So, I'm assuming many of you are asking, when is copyright protection first applicable? So, according to the U.S. Copyright Office, your work is under copyright protection the moment it is created and fixed in a tangible form that it is perceptible either directly or with aid of a use of machine or device. And how long does that copyright last? So, according to the U.S. Copyright Office, again, it says the term of copyright for a particular work depends on several factors. For works created after January 1st, 1978, copyright protection lasts for the life of the author plus an additional 70 years. For an anonymous work, a pseudonymous work, which means like a fake name, or a work made for hire, the copyright endures for a term of 95 years from the first year of its publication, or a term of 120 years from the year of its creation, whichever expires first. So, let's go ahead and analyze this piece here. So the first part underlined here is what is labeled as made by an individual. And this is like a general default, and it is the author's life plus 70 years. So that's just the general default as far as copyright goes. Now, if it is made by a corporation, which groups the works for hire, but also pseudonymous works and anonymous works, meaning works that use a fake name or no name at all, then they follow 95 years after publication or 120 years after initial creation, whichever is shorter. So do copyrights require renewal? For the 120 years after creation, it does not seem like it. However, for the 95 years, it is broken up into 2 terms, the first term being 28 years, and then you just sign up for 1 renewal for 67 years. So this seems really long, but we got to look at this part here, created after January 1st, 1978. So, what were the copyright rules before 1978? Copyright as a concept originated in Europe around the time of the printing press, but it has been expanded upon in the United States since its layout in the Constitution and under Congress's protection. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 says, "To promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries." Here is the U.S. copyright timeline according to the Association of Research Libraries, and I will make sure to have all of these sources that I'm using in the description below. So as we just went over, in 1787 was the U.S. Constitution with Article 1, Section 8. 3 years later, in 1790, was the Copyright Act, and this helped spell out a bunch of things. So it provided protection for printing, reprinting, and publishing for a default of 14 years and a chance to renew for another 14, which means it only had a maximum of 28 years. 41 years later, in 1831, we get the revision of the Copyright Act. And what this did was that it doubled the initial protection to 28 years, but the renewal was still 14, meaning this had a maximum of 42 years. But it was mainly changed because of the longer lengths that the European copyright laws had. So between 1834 and 1891, there was many court cases determining copyright ownership because there was a lot of arguments about who owned what around that time, but then also international cooperation among the European states and the US concerning copyright laws and recognition. For example, some people wrote something in one country, but then that was immediately stolen and sold for dirt cheap in the US, and that was not actually reimbursing the original author. So it was just international recognition of copyright ownership. So then we get to the 1909 revision of the U.S. Copyright Act, and this extended the renewal period to 28 years of protection, as well as broadening the scope of what can fall under copyright, such as music and motion pictures. So this gave a maximum protection of 56 years, and it also broadened what was protected in order to prevent the exploitation of what was going on. But in 1976, we get another revision of the Copyright Act. So because of technological developments and some international changes, it broadened their scope a little bit more and allowed for more technological flexibility because computers were starting to come up around the time, and especially a little bit later, as we're about to see. But they also changed it entirely dissimilarly to what we have now, to where they changed it for individual creators. It would be their lifetime plus 50 years. However, works made anonymously, under pseudonyms, or made for hire still kept the 28 years initial protection, but then with the renewal period being 47 years, meaning the maximum was 75 if it was corporate owned. And between 1976 and 1996, there was many cases concerning educational exceptions for copyright, technological advancements such as computers, and many more spelled out protections and many more international changes. However, 1998 is more or less the last huge change that we got, and this was the Copyright Term Extension Act. And this extended to the lifetime of the author plus 70 years, and works made for hire and other conditions extended from 75 years maximum to 95 years after publication or 120 years after creation, whichever comes first. However, works made prior to 1978 are determined by a multitude of factors, and Wikipedia actually helped me with this last date. What are my problems with modern copyright? The problem is concerning what happens after the copyright, and that is the public domain. Now, what is the public domain? According to the IFLA, here's how the public domain works. Works in the public domain are not subject to any restrictions and may be freely used without permission for commercial and non-commercial purposes. After a work loses its copyright, if it ever got one, because some don't, it is free to be used by anyone, anytime, without any obstacles whatsoever. Here's my little opinion piece before we go into a little bit more. So things used to enter the public domain within 28 years of creation, and now it can be almost up to a century, maybe a little bit longer depending when something was created by an individual author or if it follows the 120-year rule. In all honesty, I am fine with the copyright changes that came out of 1976, that being the author's life plus 50 or a maximum of 75 for corporate, but having it be a century long for ownership is just frustrating to me when we know that who helped push the 1998 change. Disney. According to the Harvard Library Office of Scholarly Communications Research, Disney had a hand in the copyright changes of 1998. Now, you can go ahead and pause the video and read all of this, but I'm about to break it down in just the small little bullet points that I'll have. Here is the review for the CTEA changes. So before, it was lifetime of the author plus 50 years or 28 years plus 47 extension after publication, meaning a 75-year total. And after the CTEA, it was lifetime plus 70 years or 28 years plus a 67-year extension after publication, or the 120-year rule. So this also said that Harvard used objective research and in-depth interviews, meaning that this kind of research looked through the lens of evidence rather than bias, which others, including myself, would have looked through instead. Meaning that this is far more objective and just more looking at the evidence that is there rather than just following its own little agenda. So looking at these underlined parts here, it is important to know that lobbying is a method of influence, and Disney was using $6.3 million to try to influence Congress into approving this bill. And for the lack of a better expression, it gets even spicier than that. So this large underlined portion here essentially summarizes that Disney just wanted to keep their copyrights, But not only did they want to, they needed to, and fast. So why did Disney need this enactment passed? Well, Mickey Mouse first premiered on May 15th, 1928. 1909 established the 56-year maximum for copyright, meaning that Mickey Mouse would have expired in 1984. However, the 1976 revision changed it to 75 years. So if we add those two numbers together, we get 2003, meaning Mickey would have expired in 2003 or probably 2004 on January 1st if the CTEA did not pass. But it did. Some of you might be saying, why is this a problem? What is the big deal? So what? Well, there are two problems with this. For one, Disney as a company is a hypocrite and hypocritical, but that's not really anything new. What do people, generally speaking, associate Disney with the most? Is it Marvel? Is it Hannah Montana? Is it Star Wars? Is it Encanto? Is it Toy Story? No, fairy tales. And fairy tales are in the public domain. The melting pot of free ideas, and Disney wants to prevent their own unique creations from falling in despite thriving from the pool of content available there. And here's my other problem, and this one is arguably more serious, but not new and not a one-off. And that is private businesses winning over and influencing the government. Why did copyright extend to nearly a century? At the forefront of media producers? Disney. Why is the food pyramid not medically accurate? Food industries are lobbying millions of dollars for their own gain. There is more in different areas, but these are just the two examples that I am more familiar with for this issue. Now, to be clear, I am not against lobbying, but here's a quote I found from Investopedia, and they will help me explain my frustration. Lobbying is an important lever for the productive government. Without it, governments would struggle to sort out the many competing interests of its citizens. Fortunately, lobbying provides access to government legislators, acts as an educational tool, and allows individual interests to gain power in numbers. Now, lobbying is not broken in concept. The original idea was for people to gather in their own large group, in their own assembly, in order to try to influence the government saying, hey, here are some of our thoughts. We just want to be heard. But when a company like Disney can act in their own interests in contrast to hundreds of individuals gathering for their uniting interests, it just seems wrong and manipulative. And I understand the position that these companies are taking, doing whatever is best for them, but it just seems unconstitutional for them to influence changes that impact the lives of citizens. For Disney, it was changing how entertainment would last. And for food companies, it affects everyone's daily health because they would look at skewed food pyramids. Now, is there anything being done? As far as countering companies like Disney, there have been no movements to extend the period of copyright another time, meaning Mickey is finally set to expire at the beginning of 2024. Now, it is arguably too late to make changes now because all copyrighted works from 1926 and before have already fallen into the public domain. And as far as shortening the length of copyright, it would be very, very difficult to manage. According to Stephen Carlisle's article with Nova Southeastern University, he believes that it is unconstitutional to revert, but it would also have to be addressed internationally. Now, is there anything happening to limit lobbying to this degree? This kind of lobbying being lobbying millions for privatized and individual gains. Again, nothing from the government itself, and as of now, it would appear that there is nothing currently being done from the inside. What can we do? There is a good amount of backlash online against certain lobbying practices and the state of copyright, as disagreement and argument are staples of the internet. The World Economic Forum wrote about how lobbying needs to be held more accountable by people against self-pleasing companies seeking government influence, as well as offering the suggestion for the government to exercise more oversight towards such companies to begin with. The same article from before, from Nova Southeastern University, talked about the Pirate Party, a group who believes that copyright should just be shorter. Quora has mixed reviews, some saying the copyright length is justified, and others disagreeing and thinking that it hinders creativity. However, those saying the length is good usually say that because the age of the author plus 70 years rule provides economic benefits for their families, and I completely understand that side of the argument, but I continue to think that the 50 years idea is still more reasonable than 70. In short, as is many cases with the internet, there are many arguments for all sides. However, as I was explaining pieces during the making of these slides, some people were not aware that copyright used to be significantly shorter and thought that people should always own their work, one even saying indefinitely. I believe that this is because of my generation's belief of complacency, that certain things have seemed to have always been, so forever they should be. In that case, we have always associated the mouse with animation, but that is because we were robbed of seeing the law's design happen, the idea of impermanence. But that's my take on it. What are yours? Please subscribe, like the video, and comment down below your thoughts. If you want to stay tuned for whenever I release the courtesy cut for this video, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon. That way you can stay tuned whenever I release that video and future ones moving forward. That is all. Have a great day. Sayonara.